Good afternoon, everybody. Peter Lindstrom, Chair of the Environment Committee. I call the meeting to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Wow. Phil is excited today. Phil, I bet you would like to make a motion to approve the minutes.
Yes, I certainly would do that. I'd make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are off to a great start. Okay, third thing on the agenda is the consent agenda, and that's the City of Maple Grove 2040 comp plan and comprehensive sewer plan. Is there a motion to approve the
Move approval of the
consent?
consent agenda?
And is there-
Second.
Heard a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Moving right along to the non-consent business item where we have Brooklyn Park and Osseo Interceptor Rehab. Big project. Tim, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Lindstrom, council members. My name is Tim Woodine. I'm the Assistant Manager of Interceptor Engineering. I'm here to present on business item 2020-44, the Brooklyn Park and Osseo Interceptor Rehab of 7015 A and B and 4 OS 457 and meter 244 land acquisition. A little bit of project background. The work that we're doing here are some interceptor improvements to repair corroded sewer pipe that is in poor condition within the cities of Brooklyn Park and Osseo. We're looking at about a grade 5, grade 4 pipe in some of these instances here, some of these locations. Project is located, as I said, in the city of Osseo, just near the intersection of highways 169 and 81. Or Botno Boulevard is the other name for Highway 81, and just on the north and east sides of the Caterpillar property out there, you can see on the pink lines. We do get a little further over into Highway 81 and that area to the east of that location as well. We're looking at acquiring temporary easements into the area where our pipe is. We already have permanent easements, but because of the nature of the construction, because of the need for temporary conveyance in the area, we know that we're going to be spilling over from the permanent easements that we do have. So we're going to need to acquire temporary easements from approximately 6 properties in the commercial area over there. Our proposed action is that the Metropolitan Council pass resolution 2020-3, which is attached to your business item, authorizing acquisition of temporary easements for the Brooklyn Park and Osseo Interceptor Rehabilitation Project and for staff to initiate condemnation proceedings. With that, I'll take any questions.
Any questions? Yep.
Please. Thank you, Chair Lindstrom. I just was wondering is how long is temporary? What's the time frame for that?
Temporary, thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. The temporary is for as long as it takes to do the project. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. I would expect probably around a year to 18 months would be how long temporary would last. We also usually include about a 6-month potential extension for that work as well. So that's how long that project or that temporary easement will last.
Okay.
And so if anybody's out there from this general area and they're interested in this project, is there an email listserv that they can sign up for to follow this project?
Mr. Chair, we're just starting this project, so we're still getting into a lot of the design, a lot of the nuts and bolts of the actual project itself. This is one of the first things that we start to do as we're moving forward to keep things on track. Traditionally, as we're working with our real estate group, it takes a little bit longer to go through and appraise the property as we're working on it. We want to make sure that we're taking that time to go through that process properly, and so that's the stage we're at right now is starting that property acquisition process and really looking at what it is that we need in that area. As we move forward with the project, we will have information about what the project will entail, who really will be affected, and how long precisely the project will last.
Excellent. Please.
All right, thank you, Chair Lindstrom. My other question would be, so like when it's temporary, is it like you actually sign a lease for a certain period of time, or you pay per month, or you just pay a flat fee for a period that could be up to 5, 10 years, even though it's looking like about 2 years? Or how does that actually work? What does that look like on the other side for the legality thing?
Mr. Chair, council members, typically when we sign or when we move forward with a temporary easement or temporary easement process, we will pay a lump sum we will pay a lump sum for that temporary easement at the beginning of the project. Usually that is based on the value of the land as well as the duration of the easement. And so those things will weigh into what we pay for the project. If we need to go longer than that, if we've started with an 18-month project and circumstances necessitate us to increase that that project by 6 months, we'll have a separate cost for what that additional 6 months is. So those costs are paid up front as we're moving forward with the project, and we typically negotiate those with the property owner.
Okay, thank you.
Good questions. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's the one and only item on our non-consent business agenda, but we have a couple of items on our information portion of our agenda, including one I'm looking forward to. Larry, if you're ready, come on down. Something we've heard a fair amount about, at least I've heard a fair amount about in the news these days. You're going to teach us a little bit more.
I'm going to introduce the person that's going to teach us a little.
Excellent.
So, Mr. Chair, committee members, my name is Larry Rogacki. I am an Assistant General Manager under Lisa for the Support Services Business Group. About 7 technical departments. One of those departments is managed by George Sprouse. It's process, research and development, and air quality. What we wanted to do today, there's been a lot of information in the press online about PFAS chemicals, the 3M chemicals, right? We're all pretty familiar with that. And, you know, there is a lot of activity going on, a lot of unknowns. It has many implications on our environment, our health, our society, all that. But we thought it would be helpful to share some potential impacts on our operations, on our wastewater treatment operations. What does it mean for us? And some potential risks that may run down the road. So it's just, at this point, it's information, just to help you get a better perception. So when you read all this information and you hear all these things, it can help maybe put, analyze it or put it together better. So at this point, I turn it over to George, and then we'll be here to answer questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Lindstrom and the committee members. Today, in this presentation, I'll go through a general discussion or a general description of contaminants of emerging concern, which is the broad category that this falls under. I'll provide some specific information about PFAS. We'll talk about the implications to our wastewater treatment plants. We'll summarize some of the activities that MCS has been involved in, and also at least identify the industry engagement in this issue, and then of course I'll do some summary. The phrase contaminants of emerging concern is one that's used quite generally to kind of discuss these types of things that PFAS falls under. The emerging part comes from that they're newly identified or newly measurable, or that there's new information about their impacts. And the concerns come, of course, generally from their impacts on human health, animal health, and or the environment. In particular, for wastewater treatment plants, we have some specific concerns with these types of emerging contaminants. For us, we generally receive them. We do not produce them, so we don't have a lot of control over them in some ways. In general, our current, or not in general, but for some specific compounds, our current processes don't modify them or remove them. They can be impactful at very low concentrations. Because they're emerging things, there's no standards that for measurement that have been developed or at least approved by EPA at this point. And also because they're emerging, their regulatory framework hasn't been developed. And of course, if they can be very costly. And so that leads us to the idea that for us, source control is for wastewater treatment plants is kind of the key method to address them. Examples of these include not only PFAS but endocrine disrupting compounds, pharmaceuticals, microplastics. So these might all be things you'll see discussed in this similar context. PFAS itself is an acronym that stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and they've also been called PFCs or perfluorinated compounds in the past. And kind of the key feature of these compounds is they're organic compounds with carbon chains, but in that carbon chain, the hydrogen has been replaced by fluorine, and that replacement has made them very useful to us in terms of their non-stick products, their water repellent products, their heat-resistant products, and so they've been useful, but people are now finding that they have issues with them, and those things that have made them useful might also have made them somewhat resistant to biological, chemical, and thermal degradation. So they're present in many household, commercial, and industrial products, and that's made them basically ubiquitous in the environment, in human blood, and in wildlife. We find them in our influent, and as I said, for this particular type of emerging contaminant, our processes don't remove them, don't destroy them, so anything that comes in our influent either ends up associating with our biosolids or going out in our effluent. Some of the big sources that have been identified in general have been plating and landfills. There are commercial activities such as waterproofing and rug cleaning that produce them. But as I mentioned, they're also in consumer products, so just domestic wastewater, of course, has them. As I mentioned, PFAS is the acronym that refers to this broad category of compounds. And that's useful to discuss them in general. When you get to the point of actually measuring them or identifying what their impacts might be, you need to get to actually discussing specific compounds. And so in the broader scope of PFAS, you might also see acronyms of PFOA, PFOS, PFBS, and those acronyms refer to specific compounds that we have to measure and then judge their impacts of individual. One of the big implications for wastewater emerged in 2019 and particularly prevalent in Maine in response to some contamination of a monitoring well at a dairy farm. The state of Maine has enacted a program whereby they're requiring all of their biosolids land appliers to monitor for 3 specific compounds, and they've set some initial screening levels that may make it difficult for land appliers to actually do this beneficial use of biosolids land application. And for us in particular, it's worth noting that about 10% of our biosolids in the crop year of 2018-2019 were land applied for agricultural beneficial use. And those are the biosolids that come from our Blue Lake and Empire plants. Maine isn't the only instance of this kind of emerging biosolids issue. It's come up in Michigan as well, and in Michigan, the state identified one city and has basically required them to stop land applying their biosolids, and that has also caused Maine, and I'm sure other places, to actually put a request into EPA to start setting criteria for these compounds, particularly in biosolids. So EPA does have and has published an action plan. The action plan was published in February, and for wastewater and biosolids, the plan's kind of near-term things are to actually get to the point where we can measure correctly and have validated data on biosolids. So the situation right now is EPA has a approved method for analyzing PFAS compounds in drinking water, but they're still, or the industry together is still in development stages of being able to have an approved, validated method for wastewater and biosolids. And so that's the first action on, or one of the near-term actions that EPA has for wastewater that is related to wastewater facilities. The state also has some ongoing and start things related to biosolids and PFAS, and so we've found or noted, and Larry, I think, has been in contact with the researchers about this project where they'll be developing strategies for the best management practices of PFAS and land-applied biosolids. These recent concerns related to PFAS and biosolids is in addition to a longer history of water quality concerns. Water quality concerns with PFAS and the regulatory processes to address them have been long going, and MCS has been tracking and involved in those processes. And as I mentioned, source control is one of the things we focus on because we have looked into some of these scenarios that could lead to our biggest plant, the Metro plant, having to treat to low levels of PFAS and to get to that in our effluent. And the implications of that to us was hundreds of millions of dollars of capital cost and tens of millions of dollars in operations and maintenance cost. So beyond just looking into things, we've had other activities that we've been involved in. So we have been monitoring and keeping close activity with the water quality issues. We currently do have monitoring requirements for the effluent of 4 of our plants. As I mentioned, approved and sampling and analytical methods are not yet really at the EPA approved level developed for wastewater and biosolids. And one of the things that we've carried out is research to better understand the limitations and the problems that might happen once we start measuring for these compounds at our facilities. We are active with our professional organizations and our peer agencies, and through that contact, we have identified several collaborative research projects that will help us and the industry address PFAS. And probably one of the biggest things that's been going on for a long time is that our Industrial Waste and Pollution Prevention Division has been active in source identification and monitoring. And the next 2 slides have kind of the laundry list of what IWPP is, the acronym for Industrial Waste and Pollution Prevention. What they've been doing, you can see they started back as early as 2009 doing surveys to find out what was going on with our dischargers. Those surveys not only give us information about what's all going on, but it also informs our dischargers that this is a issue important to us, and so they have done that. They expanded that survey in 2010. They have worked with specific dischargers on monitoring plans and on some specific reduction measures. They have gone to the point where they, for this aqueous film forming foam, which also sometimes is called aqueous firefighting foam, they've gone to the point of making sure that they check and that none of those discharges that include PFAS are given to us. And most recently in 2017, they they learned that helipad and fire suppression systems at hospitals is one potential source that we might be getting, and so they looked into that survey, or looked into that as well. This issue is not just for MCS, or it doesn't have just big implications for us. It has implications for our whole wastewater sector, and so our professional organizations are actively involved in this, and so you can see a bunch of them got together and put together this fact sheet, which was included in the handouts, and is just an example of the level of engagement and the amount of support that the industry is providing in this this issue. So that's the conclusion. That brings me to the end of my main points. And so, just in summary, the contaminants of emerging concern can potentially have significant impacts on wastewater treatment plants. PFAS concerns really started with our effluent, but now in the last year they have also expanded to be part of our biosolids consideration. We receive these compounds, we do not produce them, but they're not destroyed or captured in our process. So, as I've mentioned several times, source control is a big key for us. And ongoing state activities will impact what we do, so we're actively monitoring and participating in those. We have an active industrial waste and pollution control department that's engaged on this, and this is an industry-wide issue. Thank you.
I think we're going to have several questions about this, but I'd like to start out with one, which is, could you expand upon the compounds themselves? You mentioned at the outset that there's implications to human health, animal health, etc. And can you expound upon that?
So I can expound to say that yes, that those are, there's the list of what the concerns are. I think that, but I'm sorry, I'm not a medical expert. I think that, and I'm trying to remember the list of things that they are thought to, certainly a carcinogen. I think that one of the big problems that we have, or one of the concerns, is that there's still a lot of open questions about what the health impacts are, or at what levels the health impacts start, basically. So I think we can gather more information on that if you'd like.
Well, hence the emerging part, right? It's like we don't have all the answers to this. We think scientists believe that it's not good, but at what levels and what exactly it all means to us and the world around us still sounds like very much a work in progress. Get a few questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Prevention is what I'm hearing you say is that prevention is key to this, and monitoring is very important. The question I had is, where's the monitoring happening at? Is it happening at the plant, or is it somewhere before that? Because it's hard to disseminate where it's coming from, or if you're just testing at the plant where it's incoming. There's miles of pipes before that. Is there any way to test before that, and what are the plans around that?
Chair and committee members, the Industrial Waste and Pretreatment Pollution Prevention Division does have the capability and has done monitoring of specific dischargers, so landfills and those things, and so it is part of the tools that we have to do specific source monitoring.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'd like to add, some of these things exist in 4 parts per trillion, in a wastewater stream that has just about everything you can imagine. So just trying to sample and identify this stuff is extremely complex. And then you get where there's no established methodology or sampling. So, we have a long ways to go. our industrial waste department has looked at industrial waste discharges because, again, it's a point, right? So it's
Yeah.
easier to try to identify. We have also worked with the industries to ask what chemicals they use in their process and do any of those materials contain PFAS. So that's a little bit easier to, try to quantify and get at. But as George had mentioned, you have your carpet cleaned. There's PFAS now going down the drain, right? You go to a laundry and there's stain repellent on a piece of fabric. So the material, it's everywhere. So it's a little difficult. There isn't a source. We were tackling some of the big industrial sources, but we're getting to the point where it's kind of ubiquitous. It's everywhere we sample for.
Thank you for that.
Mr. Chair, this question probably isn't fair to ask you folks because this is from the MPCA, but I'm wondering on slide 8, it has a completion date of March 2021 for the MPCA to complete administration of competitive RFP to identify a project consultant. And then secondly, a completion date of June 30th, 2023 for the deliverable of best management practices report to the MPCA. I consider this to be an urgent issue, and that timeline doesn't feel urgent to me. Am I being irrational? That's a risky question to ask. But I find it really offensive that the timelines are like that.
Mr. Chair and committee members. So PCA has, I believe they're funding this with a legislative grant, and their intention is to look at biosolids across Minnesota, where it goes, what are the level of PFAS compounds, how they are applied, where they are used. So there's a lot of unknowns, and they're trying to, in a scientific way, to collect some data that then can inform some decision making going on. And it is a long time, but at the same time, it's very complex, and it's a balance.
Thank you. I appreciate that. 20 years ago tomorrow, I learned to spell and pronounce the word mesothelioma, and it's I am hearing and feeling some similarities in terms of mesothelioma and asbestos and PFAs. And I quickly Googled PFAs and health effects and looked at two different sites. One from the industry side, and I think we know which industry, and they poo-pooed the health effects. And then I looked at the EPA site, and they just flat out identify them. Infant birth weights, effects on the immune system, cancer, and thyroid hormone disruption. I would hope that if there's a way for the council, as well as other government organizations, including the MPCA and the Department of Health, to try and provide some really helpful information to Minnesotans about what we can do to reduce the risk of exposure. I think it would be smart, because if we wait a year for a consultant to represent a council district that has been hit, as do other members of the council that have been hit by PFAs, and just getting decent drinking water has become a real issue for those folks. And I know that's not in our wheelhouse, but it's something we hear about. And I'm guessing that later tonight I'm going to hear about it at a meeting that I'm going to. So just whatever we can do as a council to provide good information for consumers, residents, people who want to be doing the safe things. A whole lot of us in this state and in this country take for granted that the food we eat, the water we drink, and the products we use have been tested and have the good housekeeping or whatever seal of approval there is, FDA, whomever. And little do we know how weak the oversight is and how at risk our health is. Thanks.
I would share that concern as well, because it seems like if it takes a year to find a consultant and then it takes like another year to come out with a report, when is the actual regulation going to be implemented by the legislature and the MPCA and whoever else at EPA? That could be years down the line. And I have a sneaky feeling that we will be finding out more information about the health ramification, infant birth weights,
Birth weights.
immune systems, et cetera, et cetera. And it's too bad we can't move at a quicker pace. That's not necessarily your jobs, but we'll see what happens, I guess. And we'll do what we can, and we'll do what we need to do. And if we can help in the research, we should be doing that as well, right? And that can be a role that we can play as well.
Mr. Chair and committee members, as George mentioned, we are involved with some of the PCA on their research activities, with some of the national research that's going on. So in addition to monitoring, we have partnered, or we have tried to help and offer our expertise as best we can.
It's interesting to think about a stain repellent on a shirt or on your carpet, and you get it washed and it's 4 parts per trillion or something like that. An extremely small amount that could have huge implications. Please.
Thank you, Chair. Could you help me better understand what Maine is doing that we're not doing in Minnesota?
Chair and committee members, I think it's a question that's open to debate in our sector. So they've actually, so in Minnesota, there's no criteria that's been placed on PFAS compounds in biosolids. And in Maine, in reaction to a contaminated well, they placed screening criteria that people have to try and measure on their biosolids. And if their biosolids are below those screening criteria, which some of the debate would be where and how did they get that screening criteria? But if they do fall below that screening criteria, those biosolids couldn't be land applied. They'd have to be you'd have to find something else to do with them. And part of the concern and problem with that is, what do you do with them? Because one of the other potential ways that people would dispose of biosolids is to put it in a landfill, but the landfill then becomes a source of PFAS. So, sorry, that may be a rambling answer. That's.
And just a quick follow-up, please, Chair. So does that, and according to this timeline, the soonest that we would develop any kind of similar requirement would be June 30th of 2023, or at least have a recommendation for that? Or is that something that would potentially come sooner?
No, Mr. Chair and committee members, the legislature may do something on their own. That's something we should anticipate, or at least know there's a possibility of. This one project that PCA has is really focused on biosolids and how do we apply it, and where do we apply it, and what happens, to chemicals on the land. But legislative action, what we saw in Maine or Michigan, there's just an initiative to do that. So that is a risk for us, not knowing what actions the Minnesota legislature or, the EPA might take. So it's just something we have to keep our eye on.
And hopefully in Minnesota, we now have a heightened understanding of what happens when things get in our groundwater and the ramifications. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I have a little different take on it. I'm appreciating that you guys are making the effort to get out ahead of this. And I know when we had mercury issues in the wastewater and we put the traps in the dentist's office to stop that from going down the drain, it was a very cost-effective way to deal with a very big pollution problem. And it sounds like for plating companies and whatnot, filtering it before it gets into the waste stream is a much more economical way than trying to put that sort of treatment on our entire wastewater system. So I appreciate that you're looking at that. I think it's also important to understand that we can test things now at such tiny amounts that it may not have any impact on us, and having a scientific process to figure out the concentration so we don't spend billions of dollars removing something that's not harmful, because I mean there's lots and lots and lots of things in our water from the environment that that are in such small amounts, but just because we can test for it doesn't necessarily mean it's at a dangerous concentration. So it's a matter of finding the right numbers. So I think it's better to do it right than come up with a quick answer on what's safe or what's not and potentially spend billions of dollars removing something that isn't harming anybody too, because that billions of dollars could go for something else beneficial to people if we're not doing an unnecessary treatment process.
So, Mr. Chair and committee members, the example of Mercury is a very good example. We could have spent many millions of dollars on the treatment plant to try to remove mercury from the influent. Because we had a main source in the dental office, and we had a technology that was by far and away cost effective. We've reduced mercury coming to the treatment plant, I think over 65 or 70% in the last 10 years at a very, very small cost savings. And that's source control, right? Try to keep it out of the sewer system. Don't remove it once it's in. PFAS is a little harder because it's everywhere. Now, our industrial waste group worked with the platers because they were a big user of that. And their industry stepped up, looked for alternative products, and they've reduced their use. The firefighting foams, the hospitals, they've been very receptive as an industry to look because they understand that they're contributing. So we won't get rid of it, but I think, as a society, we're aware and we're reducing it. And, sort of as you said, you only have so much money. Where do you spend your money? So, try to get the biggest bang for the buck, I think.
Excellent.
There's one more question. On slide 6, there's a reference to crop year 2018 and 2019, and 10% of environmental services biosol is being land applied for beneficial agricultural use. Is there a communication to the recipients of this? Are they aware that there would potentially be contaminants?
Mr. Chair and committee members, I know that we communicate to the communities, to the neighbors, to the people along the path. Exactly what that communication is, I am not fully aware. So I know that we are communicating with them that we will be applying biosolids. I don't know how much detail is in that. We can probably get back to you.
And I guess that would sort of, the next question would be like, is there any kind of indemnification of, say, the council in the event that these were found to be contaminated later on down the road?
It's a good point.
I can't answer that one.
It's a good thing for us to be aware of. That's for certain.
Exactly.
Other questions? Yeah, please.
Right, thank you, Chair. I just had one is, are you aware, is SKB still actively taking the substance in that? And is there any time limit or amount of quantity that they're no longer be taking a landfill?
About our biosolids?
Or SKB, the one, the plant in the landfill in Rosemont, are they still actively taking the substance? And is there any limit that they're expressed where their limit's going to be taking the substance?
Mr. Chair and committee members, I know that SKB is still receiving industrial waste. And I know that they sample and we sample their leachate because we collect we treat the water that comes off the landfills, and I know there are PFCs in that water.
Okay.
What the future of that landfill is or their limits, I'm not aware.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Nothing that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and we know you'll be staying on top of it.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to our final item, General Manager's report.
Just to say that I'm happy I have a voice back after 5 days of laryngitis. Well, maybe others aren't so happy about that. On the PFAS, I'm hoping that you'll have a sense that this is fast unfolding. There's a lot we don't know, but we do have some history with it. Think back to the last permit renewal for the Metro plant. We were looking at potentially a PFAS limit for our effluent discharge. They were looking at a level that was much lower than what the drinking water standard for PFAS was at the time. So that's all been changed, but we're talking not too many years ago when even that was quite different. So it's fast unfolding, and I think got my attention is I didn't realize pizza boxes had PFAS in them. There's certain points at which you have to, well, do we really need that in pizza boxes? So we as citizens probably have to start demanding some change in the use of it, so we reduce the sources and do the best we can to keep it out of the waste streams and out of the environment, like we did with Mercury. So to that end, any other, I keep reminding you, but I'm going to keep reminding you, if you hear topics that you'd like us to give you informational background on or updates on our work that we're doing in the facilities that you're curious about knowing more than what you've heard, just let us know and we'll queue it up for you.
You can count on it.
Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.